One single acre, one nearly forgotten crop, and 0 hay bills running from November straight through March. That is not a fantasy claim. That is already happening on small farms that stopped listening to the feed store. Right now, $200 to $250 a ton buys hay that's half-rotted before cattle even touch it. Hauling it, stacking it, watching it mold in the rain, and hoping enough was bought to survive February. What if a single crop produced up to 30 tons of feed per acre without any of that hassle? What if that same crop stored itself directly in the ground, surviving frost with no barn or baler needed? That exact crop kept entire European herds alive through both world wars, and almost nobody grows it here now. That absence is not an accident. It is the result of a system that wanted feed purchased, not grown. By the end of this video, this crop gets identified clearly, along with how to plant it on 1 acre. Feeding it safely, and the real dollar savings farms are seeing every winter also get covered in full. Let's talk honestly about what hay is actually doing to a small operation's bottom line every single year. That gap between what gets paid and what actually reaches an animal's stomach adds up fast every winter. Most farmers treat hay as simply part of the deal, an unavoidable cost of doing business at all. Break down the real numbers though, and hay quietly bleeds small farms dry year after year without mercy. Start with price, since most of the country currently sits between $180 and $250 per ton. Some regions run worse, especially in drought zones or for anyone buying late in the actual season. A ton of hay bought at full price rarely delivers a full ton of usable feed by the time it's eaten. North of $300 per ton becomes entirely possible under those exact conditions in a bad year. Add transport next, since hauling hay yourself or paying someone else adds $30 to $50 per ton. That cost exists purely to get the hay onto the property, before a single animal even eats any of it. Add waste after that, since round bales sitting outside lose 25 to 35% of their nutritional value. Rain, snow, and ground moisture quietly destroy feed that was already paid for at full price up front. Watching a full bale go moldy after paying full price is the kind of loss that stings every single time. Quality becomes a total gamble on top of all that, since bales sometimes hide mold, weeds, and thick stems. Cattle eat it anyway because they're hungry, not because the feed is actually any good for them. Body condition drops, calves come in weaker, and breeding rates fall as a direct result of poor feed quality. That kind of gambling on quality is something most farmers accept simply because there's rarely another option. That means paying twice for bad hay, once at the register, and again through a herd that underperforms afterward. Consider wintering 20 head for 120 days, which realistically requires roughly 18 tons of hay minimum. At $200 a ton, that comes to $3,600 just for the base feed alone. At $250 a ton, that climbs to $4,500 for that same herd. Add an emergency run in February after miscalculating. Add bales lost to rain, and add diesel for hauling everything. Easily crossing $5,000 for a small herd every single year becomes the realistic total cost. That money leaves the farm completely, heading straight to the hay dealer, the trucking company, and the fuel pump. None of it stays behind. None of it builds soil, and none of it makes the following year any cheaper. Losses like these rarely get tracked closely, yet they quietly define whether a winter turns out profitable. That is the actual trap, and the feed industry has zero real incentive to ever show anyone the way out. A way out does exist though, growing quietly in fields across Europe and New Zealand for over 150 years. The reason almost nobody has heard of it is exactly the problem worth unpacking here in detail. This isn't some trendy idea recently cooked up somewhere. It has fed livestock longer than most modern practices existed. It is called the fodder beet, and it has been hiding in plain sight for well over 250 years. Fodder beets were developed in Germany and Holland back during the 1700s as a dedicated livestock feed crop. By the 1770s, English farmers were already planting them specifically as winter cattle feed across the countryside. They called them Mangelwurzels, a rough English translation of the original German word for beetroot. Weak calves and falling breeding rates rarely get connected back to feed quality until the pattern repeats. That name stuck, And so did the reliable results those farmers kept seeing season after season. By the mid-1800s, nearly every European dairy herd relied on fodder beets to survive the winter months. They formed the backbone of livestock nutrition across Britain, France, and Scandinavia for generations of farmers. The gap between what a herd needs and what actually arrives on time is where real losses hide. During both World Wars, entire military herds stayed alive on fodder beets once grain supplies collapsed entirely. That level of reliability is exactly how trusted this crop became across an entire continent for centuries. In New Zealand today, over 150,000 acres still get planted every year specifically for winter feed. Dairy farms there report 10 to 15% more milk solids from cows-fed fodder beet diets. That comes compared directly against grass-only winter feeding under otherwise identical farm conditions. That is not folklore or exaggeration. That is documented data pulled from government-backed field trials. So why did North America largely forget about this crop despite its long, well-documented history elsewhere? It never disappeared because it stopped working. It disappeared because cheap, subsidized corn quietly took over instead. Corn silage became the new standard, and hay proved easy to bale and stack with modern machinery. A crop trusted across an entire continent for centuries deserves more attention than it currently gets here. Fodder beets required more hands-on management, and cheap fuel made hauling hay simpler than growing roots. Nobody wanted to bother with a root crop once trucking feed in became fast and relatively inexpensive. The knowledge never simply faded on its own. It got actively replaced by a very different system. That system profits specifically when feed gets purchased rather than grown directly on the farm itself. It profits by keeping farmers dependent on inputs they cannot fully control themselves season to season. The crop itself never actually stopped working, and farmers who kept growing it never stopped saving real money. With hay prices climbing every year and supply chains growing thinner, smart small farmers are bringing this crop back. A crop this old surviving 2 world wars says something modern feed trends have yet to prove themselves. First, the yield numbers. Figures that genuinely sound fake at first glance, but are fully documented and real. 1 acre of fodder beets can produce 20 to 30 tons of usable feed under normal conditions. In especially good years, New Zealand farmers have pushed past 40 tons of feed from a single acre. That equals stacking roughly 10 full pickup trucks worth of feed off just 1 acre of ground. Compare that directly to hay, where US hay fields average only 2 to 3 tons per acre typically. Corn silage, often called the king of tonnage, tops out around 18 to 22 tons per acre. Fodder beets can literally double even that impressive corn silage number under comparable growing conditions. Prime land isn't even required to achieve these numbers, which makes the whole crop even more remarkable. Fodder beets grow well in soil that wouldn't even support a decent hay crop under normal circumstances. They drive a taproot 3 to 4 feet deep, pulling nutrients from layers shallow-rooted crops never reach. 1 acre, up to 30 tons, a single number that should change how winter feeding gets planned entirely. Yield alone means little, though if the actual nutrition inside that yield isn't genuinely there for livestock. Field trials backed by a government agency carry more weight than any single farmer's word alone. Second, nutritional value, and fodder beets deliver far more than sheer bulk to any herd eating them. That kind of historical reliability is worth far more than any single glowing testimonial from one farm. They pack real energy density, with dry matter content running between 12 and 18% depending on variety. That figure sounds low until metabolizable energy gets factored in, sitting around 12 to 13 megajoules per kilogram. That places fodder beets higher than most hay, higher than average pasture, and competitive with actual grain rations. They carry heavy loads of digestible sugars that cattle convert efficiently into body condition and milk production. Trials in New Zealand showed dairy cows on fodder beet diets maintaining body condition through winter without grain. That represents genuine feed cost elimination, not simply a modest reduction in overall winter feeding expenses. Reliability across generations of farmers carries more weight than any single season of good results. For beef cattle specifically, that same energy density keeps weight gain, going through winter instead of typical plateaus. Animals come out of winter noticeably stronger, calves emerge healthier, and breeding rates improve across the herd. That isn't just money saved, it represents an actively improving herd built through better winter nutrition alone. An industry built around repeat purchases has little reason to promote a crop that ends that cycle. Third, storage, and this particular detail tends to surprise people the very first time they learn about it. Fodder beets store themselves directly in the ground, exactly where they originally grew across the season. No barn gets needed, no plastic wrap, no silage pits, and no hay rings required anywhere on the farm. Beets simply sit in the soil through frost, through snow, and through freezing rain without any real damage. The ground itself functions as the entire storage system, at zero additional infrastructure cost whatsoever. When feeding time comes, animals get strip grazed directly across the field, or beets get lifted and hauled. Compare that directly to hay storage, which requires covered space or accepts 25 to 35% losses. Pallets, gravel pads, tarps, twine, and real ongoing time investment all come with typical hay storage setups. With fodder beets, the earth handles all of that work completely for free across the entire winter. In regions with severe freeze-thaw cycles, some farmers lift beets in late fall and clamp them outdoors. Simple outdoor piles covered with straw keep beets viable for 4 to 5 months with minimal loss involved. A system built to keep farmers buying rather than growing rarely announces itself. It just becomes normal. Zero infrastructure and zero spoilage cost alone make this particular crop worth seriously trying on any farm. Fourth, planting, and this crop requires no special equipment beyond what most small farms already own outright. No precision seeder, no dedicated beet planter, and nothing beyond a simple garden seeder or hand-push planter. For 1 acre, most small farmers use a basic walk-behind seeder costing under $40 total. Planting happens in late spring, April or May, depending on regional climate zone and last frost date. A knowledge gap this wide rarely closes on its own, without someone actively bringing it back into view. A crop able to thrive in poor soil removes yet another common excuse for never attempting it. Rows sit spaced 18 to 22 inches apart, with seeds going in roughly half an inch deep. Germination takes 10 to 14 days under normal spring conditions in most temperate growing regions. The crop needs 140 to 180 days to fully mature before harvest becomes possible. Getting seeds into the ground on schedule means pulling real feed by October in most regions. Soil prep stays straightforward, loosening the top 8 to 12 inches and removing rocks that could deflect roots. A basic soil test reveals whether lime or additional fertilizer gets needed before planting begins in earnest. Fodder beets are heavy feeders on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, so that step should never get skipped. One single afternoon of planting sets up an entire winter's worth of feed for a working herd. Fifth, feeding strategy. And this step matters enormously for avoiding real problems down the road later. Whole fodder beets should never simply get thrown at cattle on day one without any transition period first. These beets run high in sugar, and cattle transitioned too quickly can develop a condition called acidosis. That mistake is the single most common error new growers make, and it is entirely avoidable with planning. Start with a 14-day transition period, beginning gradually rather than switching diets all at once. Days 1 through 3 offer just 2 to 3 pounds per head alongside normal hay or forage. Days 4 through 7 bump that amount up to 5 to 8 pounds per head daily. Numbers this large are exactly why this crop deserves a serious second look from any small operation. By day 14, cattle can safely handle full rations of 30 to 40 pounds per head daily. Fiber should always accompany fodder beets, and plain straw works perfectly, while costing almost nothing extra. That fiber slows digestion and prevents the sugar spike responsible for causing rumen upset in transitioning cattle. Larger beets should get chopped or cracked to reduce choking risk, especially for younger animals in the herd. 10 pickup trucks worth of feed from 1 acre is the kind of number worth double checking twice. A sharp spade or a simple beet chopper handles that task in just minutes per animal fed. Following this exact protocol tends to produce zero real problems across an entire winter feeding season. Skipping it tends to mean blaming the crop later for problems that actually came from the method used. Sixth, real dollar savings. And this is where the underlying economics start looking genuinely remarkable on paper. Seed cost for 1 acre of fodder beets runs $30 to $50 under most typical conditions. Fertilizer adds another $80 to $120, depending on existing soil quality and test results. Total input cost for that same acre lands somewhere around $150 to $200 total. That acre then produces 20 to 30 tons of usable winter feed from that modest initial investment. Compare that to buying 20 tons of hay at $200 per ton, totaling $4,000. Cattle finishing winter in better shape than expected tends to convince skeptics faster than any statistic. Add transport, waste, and storage losses, and that realistic total climbs to $4,500 to $5,500. One fodder beet acre just replaced $4,000 to $5,000 worth of hay for under $200. That represents a savings of $3,800 to $4,800 from a single acre of ground. One Missouri operation running 30 head switched to fodder beets 3 years ago with dramatic results. Their winter feed bill dropped from over $5,000 down to under $400 total. They even sold 15 tons of surplus beets at $60 per ton for extra revenue afterward. That added $900 in income from the exact same acre that fed their entire herd. Energy density like this is what actually keeps a herd thriving through the coldest stretch of winter. Those numbers aren't theoretical projections. They come from a real farm that stopped losing money every winter. Seventh, a soil benefit that almost nobody talks about when discussing fodder beets as a feed crop. Frost and freezing rain doing no real damage to stored feed still surprises most first-time growers. Fodder beets don't just feed animals directly, they also feed the soil they grow in over time. Matching or beating grain in energy density is a rare claim for any crop grown this simply. That massive taproot punches 3 to 4 feet deep, breaking up compaction no tillage tool can reach. Once those root channels decompose after harvest, they leave pathways for water and air deep in the soil. The leaf canopy shades ground throughout summer, naturally suppressing weeds and reducing moisture evaporation from the surface. After harvest, remaining leaf matter breaks down into organic matter that feeds soil biology directly and reliably. Farmers rotating fodder beets with pasture consistently report noticeable improvement in grass growth the following season. Those deep root channels let following crops access nutrients and water previously locked out of reach entirely. Nothing about this crop mines the soil. Every acre planted actually comes back stronger the following year. That represents regenerative agriculture in its purest form. No fancy inputs and no consultant fees involved. Just a root crop quietly doing what root crops have done reliably for centuries across multiple continents. Honestly, fodder beets sounded like nonsense the very first time this crop got mentioned in a farming group. Someone posted about growing 25 tons of feed on a single acre, and scrolling past felt tempting. It sounded like one of those too good to be true claims that fall apart under real conditions. Hay had been the norm for years, expensive and unpredictable, but familiar in a way that felt safe. Then hay prices jumped again that fall, with a quote arriving at $240 a ton. That number genuinely made the math sick to run, since winter feed nearly outpaced spring calf sales entirely. Margins weren't just tight at that point, they had effectively disappeared from the whole operation entirely. So the decision became simple. Risking $50 in seed money seemed worth whatever got learned from it. Storage that costs nothing is rare enough in farming that it deserves real attention on its own. Outdoor piles covered in straw sound primitive, yet the results consistently hold up through a full winter. Fodder beet seed got ordered online, and a quarter acre went in during late April that year. A $35 walk behind cedar found at a farm swap handled the actual planting itself. Zero spoilage cost changes the entire calculation compared to anything requiring a barn or covered storage. Soil got prepped with a basic tiller, a soil test got run, and lime plus fertilizer got added. Total investment came in under $60 for that entire quarter-acre planting effort. The first month felt nerve-wracking, since seedlings came up slowly, and weeds tried hard to take over. Hand weeding happened twice, and giving up genuinely crossed the mind more than once during that stretch. By July, though, those beets were exploding with growth across the entire quarter-acre plot. By September, roots the size of footballs were visibly pushing up out of the ground everywhere. Harvest happened in mid-October, pulling just over 7 tons off that single quarter acre of ground. That works out to a 28 ton per acre pace across the full growing season. 12 head got fed through the entire winter, using those beets plus some cheap straw for fiber. Total feed cost that winter came to just $85 for the entire herd. The year before, over $2,200 had been spent on hay for those same exact animals. Complete skepticism turned into full conviction within that single growing season of real, hands-on results. Cattle came out of that winter in better condition than any previous hay-fed winter could remember. Coats looked slick, body scores were noticeably up, and 2 previously struggling cows bred on the first cycle. A full acre gets planted every year now, with no plans to ever depend on outside hay again. Now for the errors that trip up almost every single first-year grower attempting this crop. These mistakes are simple to avoid once known about, but they can wreck results without that awareness. First mistake, skipping the transition period entirely, which stands as the single biggest error possible here. Equipment this simple removes one of the biggest barriers that keeps farmers from ever trying this crop. Going straight from hay to full beet rations overnight risks acidosis developing quickly within the herd. A $40 seeder handling an entire acre removes most excuses for not at least trying this. Rumen pH crashes, animals go off feed, and severe cases can genuinely result in lost animals. That 14-day gradual introduction is not optional, it marks the difference between success and real disaster. Starting slow, increasing daily, and always pairing beets with fiber prevents this entire problem from happening. Second mistake, ignoring weed control during the first 6 weeks after planting when seedlings establish slowly. Weeds will outcompete young seedlings fast if given any real head start during that critical window. Hand weeding, hoeing, or shallow cultivation between rows matters enormously during those first 6 weeks specifically. A protocol this simple removes most of the guesswork that scares new growers away in the first place. Once the leaf canopy closes over, beets suppress weeds naturally without much further intervention required. Slacking early, though, thins the stand and collapses yields well below what the crop could otherwise produce. Third mistake, planting into compacted or waterlogged soil that prevents the taproot from driving deep properly. Hitting a hard pan layer at 8 inches deforms the root and keeps it small at harvest. Waterlogged ground rots roots before harvest ever arrives, wasting an entire season's planting effort completely. Proper soil prep, breaking up compaction, and improving drainage where needed saves the entire crop up front. Fourth mistake, feeding whole beets directly to young or small animals without any chopping beforehand. Large fodder beets pose a genuine choking hazard for calves, sheep, and goats specifically. A choking hazard prevented by 30 seconds of chopping is about as cheap as farm safety ever gets. Chopping or cracking beets for smaller livestock takes roughly 30 seconds per beet using a simple spade. That small extra step prevents a genuinely serious problem from ever developing within a smaller herd. Avoiding these 4 specific mistakes tends to make a first year noticeably smoother than most people expect. Getting them wrong tends to mean blaming the crop itself when the actual fault sat in the method. Picture a farm exactly like this one, 3 years after fodder beets first went into the ground. A slow, careful transition is a small price to pay compared to the risk of skipping it entirely. Fiber paired correctly with beets is the detail that separates a smooth winter from a risky one. 1 acre gets planted every single spring, at a total cost sitting comfortably under $200. That acre produces enough feed to carry an entire herd from November through March without 1 hay delivery. No phone calls go out to the hay dealer come January, and no panic buying happens at inflated prices. No bales sit rotting in the rain anywhere on the property throughout the entire winter season. The winter feed bill drops from thousands of dollars down to almost nothing across the whole year. Surplus sold for extra income turns a feed crop into a genuine secondary revenue stream as well. That represents $3,000 to $5,000 staying in pocket every single year instead of leaving the farm. Across 5 years, that adds up to $15,000 to $25,000 kept rather than handed away. Cattle come out of winter in noticeably better condition, with improved breeding rates across the entire herd. Calves emerge stronger, and vet bills drop since well-fed animals naturally fight off illness more effectively. Soil gets better every single season, as deep taproots continue breaking up compaction layer by layer. Organic matter builds steadily, and pastures grow thicker the year after beets since the ground stays genuinely alive. This is what real self-sufficiency actually looks like in practice, beyond simply growing food for a household. It means growing feed directly, controlling the single biggest recurring expense on most small farms entirely. It means doing all of that with a crop already proven reliable across 250 years of use. Winter no longer controls the farm under this kind of system. The farm controls winter instead. A farm that stopped bleeding money every winter is a far stronger argument than any spreadsheet projection. Numbers like these are exactly why the feed industry has little interest in this crop becoming common knowledge. So here is a genuine question worth sitting with. What would happen to that extra money once the hay bill disappears? A pattern this consistent across multiple seasons stops looking like luck and starts looking like a real system. More fencing, more animals, or finally building that barn that's been sitting on the to-do list for years? Drop that answer in the comments below, since every single one gets read and genuinely considered afterward. A single quarter-acre test plot is a low-risk way to prove this system before committing further. If this changed how winter feeding gets thought about, hitting subscribe brings real strategies like this every week. No theory, no fluff, just results pulled from real farms actually running this exact system today. A farm never has to run on someone else's hayfield again once this knowledge gets put to use. Deciding what to do with money that used to disappear every winter is a genuinely good problem to have. 1 acre, 1 crop, 0 hay bills. This knowledge was always available. It simply needed rediscovering.